before I went on vacation that I'm setting a timer and that at 8 o'clock I'm done, no matter what I'm saying. And if it's in the middle of a thought, too bad. Prayer is important, and we just got to get to it. And sometimes I look up and I think, I only have just one more thought. It'll only take me 2 minutes. And 12 minutes later, I'm still talking. And so it's not that important. So if you really wanted what's very important, you could read it in the Bible yourself. And so Mark 5:21, I'll read down through the end of the chapter. This is one of those stories that I have always loved. Actually, this would be the text for my very first sermon ever preached that I preached. I looked back in my logs just to see. It was in 2004, about this time of year, at a Preacher Boys service my pastor would hold on Sunday nights, because we had so many that were going to college to study to preach. And so he would get us lined up. It'd be over a couple of different Sunday nights. He'd get us lined up 3 a night usually, and he'd tell us, you have 15 minutes, and that's it. You cannot go over because you got more people that are coming up. And so we'd preach, we'd sing a song. Next guy preach, sing a song, preach, sing a song. We're done, And so we would motor right through it. And so this is the text I preached for the first time. But I love this story, and there are different things that came up in my week of vacation that I felt brought me back to this story, and it's a good thing to revisit some familiar ground from time to time. And when Jesus was passed over again by ship unto the other side, much people gathered unto him, and he was nigh unto the sea. And behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name. When he saw him, he fell at his feet, and besought him greatly, saying, My little daughter lieth at the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. And Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. And a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse, when she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind, and touched his garment. For she said, If I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press and said, Who touched my clothes? And his disciples said unto him, Thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, Who touched me? And he looked round about to see her that had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him, and told him all the truth. And he said unto her, Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace, and be whole of thy plague. While he yet spake, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain which said, Thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the master any further? As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he saith unto the ruler of the synagogue, Be not afraid, only believe. And he suffered no man to follow him, save Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And he cometh to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and seeth the tumult, and them that wept and wailed greatly. And when he was come in, he saith unto them, Why make ye this ado and weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleepeth. But they laughed him to scorn. But when he had put them all out, he taketh the father and the mother of the damsel, and them that were with him, and entereth in where the damsel was lying. And he took the damsel by the hand, and said unto her, Talitha cumi, which is, being interpreted, Damsel, I say unto thee, arise. And straightway the damsel arose and walked, for she was of the age of 12 years, and they were astonished with a great astonishment. And he charged them straitly that no man should know it, and commanded that something should be given her to eat. Here in this text, I've always come to it, and I come away with the thought that we ought not to miss the great work that God wants to do in our life. As you look back on the past year, God has been working in your life, whether you were aware of it or willing in it or not. God has been working in your life. And a lot of times we can kind of recoil at what God is doing in our life. We can play stupid when God is working in our life and just not appreciate what he's accomplishing and how he's drawing us, how he's strengthening us, how he's leading us, maybe even what ties and connections to this earth he is loosening for us in our anticipation of being able to enjoy the glories of heaven for all of eternity. I think some lessons that Christians struggle in the Western world to learn are the lessons that this world is not everything. And we all know that. Oh, yes, Pastor, we're looking forward to being in heaven. That'll be great. But we seem to be so comfortable and so happy here on this earth. As I mentioned during the Christmas series, we are so content in this Babylon that we just don't even have any longing for the true comfort that can only come in the presence of God. We think we may experience or have enjoyed some level of comfort here on this earth now without being in close communion and fellowship with God. And there may be things about your life that are comfortable, but to know true comfort, that's a whole different subject. And so we can miss out on the work of God. And how do we miss out on God's work in our lives? I believe that we look at this story and we see that there are three different entities or three different characters that are in motion in this story. Two of them miss God's work, Jesus' work. They miss it. They miss out on it. They miss the opportunity to celebrate, to enjoy the work of God. But there's one group in this story that gets to enjoy it and gets to be the recipient of God's work. And what do they do that makes a big difference from the other two groups? Let's look at these three groups here. Let's start off with the carefree crowd. The carefree crowd. When you look at the carefree crowd, you're looking at a group that's very emotional, a group that's swayed by emotion, a group that rides the waves of people having an excitement and just fascination with the new and the next. And then you can see the carefree crowd will just crash and burn in complete emotional disarray, and they're wrung out, and they're having so many troubles emotionally. Why? Because they're just really along for the ride. And you see that this crowd shows up when Jesus comes across the water, lands on the shore, and they will throng him immediately. Now, there in all the stories of people interacting with Jesus Christ, you'll see a pattern. Those who come to Christ come with really three different purposes. They're either coming with a concern. If they're coming with a concern, then they're usually bringing somebody that needs healing, or they themselves need something, or there's something that they're needing addressed. They have a concern, and they see Jesus as the only one that will be able to meet that need. You'll see others that will approach Jesus Christ, and they have a challenge for him. They don't really believe him to be who he says he is, and so they're going to approach him with a challenge. They're going to question him. That's the religious leaders. You see them approach with that angle as well. But then you see the third group that just will be around Jesus, and they're really only there because of a celebrity kind of status. They're just fascinated with the identity or the idea of Jesus. He's this amazing rabbi, and let's just go see, and then we can go tell people that we've seen him, and this is great. I've told the story before. I won't tell it in detail, but after Christine and I were married, one of my first grand ideas was, let's go to Times Square and enjoy the ball drop. That just sounds like so much fun. Every time I happen to see it on the TV, everyone looks like they're having a great time. It's just a wonderful, happy, exhilarating experience, and so I want to have that happy and exhilarating experience. Everyone wanted to kill me after the ball dropped, okay? It was terrible, it was cold, it was miserable, our lives were threatened, and all we ate that day was chicken on a stick. And it's just really a miserable experience. But I can say I've done it. I've been there. We've experienced it. That celebrity kind of fascination draws people in. I wasn't there with a concern or a challenge. I was just there because I could say I'd done it. And that's how some people will approach it. Someone shared a video to me of someone that was talking about this rabbi that's garnered some attention over in Israel, and he's I guess, a great student of the Scriptures. I guess They're stories that he's had some healings and has performed some miracles and such. And you can watch the video, and people are just thronging this rabbi over there. It's very interesting on a lot of levels, and I won't get into all the theology and all that's going on with that in the background. But the point is, if someone of a lesser status than Jesus Christ can get such a gathering around them because of what he's doing in another part of the world, then I can just only imagine what Jesus Christ had to deal with the carefree crowd that's thronging him. And so this group is coming, and they're not bringing any concern. They're not bringing any challenge. They're just spectators. Well, what are they hoping to accomplish as these spectators? They're focused on themselves. That's it. They're just there to say they've done it, or to share in an experience, or to maybe even feel good about what they have done. Maybe with the feel good part of it, if you look back at this Jairus' house, you'll see in verse 39, when he was come in, he saith unto them, Why make ye this ado and weep? The damsel's not dead, but sleepeth. And what he's talking about is he's walked into the house, and they're weeping and wailing, and this was rather customary. But there probably is a lot of people that were just sharing in the emotion of this young girl has died. She's 12 years old. This young girl has died, and this is a grievous thing. It's a burden on the parent's heart, something that they're struggling with. And so the carefree crowd is there to do their part, but they're not there to see what Jesus will do. That's not even on their radar. They're just totally not connected with that whatsoever. The carefree crowd. But then you'll see the second group that's really moving in this story are the driven disciples. The driven disciples, based on kind of the attitude of their interaction with Jesus, I, in my sanctified imagination, believe they're getting caught up in the service of what's going on. They've just gotten off the boat. If you look back in the previous verses of this chapter, Jesus has just cast out the demons out of the maniac of Gadara. This has been a tremendous transformation. They've just seen Jesus still the water and the waves. They've seen Jesus do amazing healings. The disciples are completely on board with Jesus right now. But as best as I can tell at this point, if the story is chronologically aligned with everything else, you probably are not seeing a lot of Jesus raising someone from the dead yet. This is probably one of the earliest exhibits of Jesus doing that. And so the disciples hear that Jairus' daughter, she's sick, she's on her deathbed. Jairus is humble enough to come and ask Jesus to do this for him. Jesus is making his way to Jairus' house, and almost with the kind of degree of disinterest you read about with Jesus and Lazarus, his friend. Jesus hears about Lazarus. He's dying. Won't you come and heal him? Jesus just hangs out for another 3 days and just doesn't even make any kind of emergency movement toward Lazarus. Ken runs on an ambulance. And can you imagine if he got a call, Pastor Dan, he's sick. And Ken was sitting there at the station, and Ken's like, oh, okay. Now, maybe he'd do that. I don't know. But, okay. And everyone's running around like, what? Why are we going anywhere? It'll be fine. It'll be okay. And, he waits 3 days to come by my house, and then he finds out I'm dead. That's not a good move, right? I mean, your rapport, your PR is just tanked. I mean, everything's gone down. And you kind of see that with Jesus, with Lazarus. It's not to that degree with this little girl, but you kind of get the idea that Jesus isn't on the same pace as the rest of the world. But the disciples are, in my imagination, are moving the crowd. Oh, we got to get Jesus to Jairus' house. Hey, move, get out of the way. Jesus is coming through. We've got a mission to accomplish. He has got to get to this house in time. We're racing against time. Do you race against time? Or do you have time to kill? I just wrote a devotional this morning on this subject. I thought, if Aesop's fable of the tortoise and the hare, I think Aesop wrote that one. If Aesop's fable, the tortoise and the hare, was your life, if you're the hare, time is the turtle. And why? Because the time just constantly ticks away, ticks away, ticks away. It's just constant. It's just steady. It's just going right along. And we, as the rabbit in the race, we run ahead and we think, I'm ahead of time. And so then we are killing time. And then when we're killing time, we fall behind time. Now we're racing against time, and we're breaking our necks to try to get ahead of time. And it becomes this race back and forth, back and forth. And in the end, we're never going to win if we're going to have an improper relationship with time itself. Time is just ebbing on constantly. How do you connect with what's going on around you? Jesus Christ, he's not in a race with time. He's not a race against time. He's not killing time. He is precisely where God the Father wants him at every single point. Every single point. And one of the things that I look forward to this prayer intensive, specifically what I'm asking the Lord to help me with in this prayer intensive is, Lord, I need to be so connected with you that I'm not so flustered with busyness where I'm trying to rush, get ahead, do this, got things to do, don't have time for that, get out of my way, I'm frustrated, why isn't this working? And all these other things that come out naturally out of my life, which really reveal the contents of my heart. When your life is put under pressure, what comes out in those moments reveals who you really are. But to actually connect with, I want to be exactly in the point that God wants me to be in. I don't want to be rushing ahead of him. I don't want to be lagging behind him. I want to be right next to the turtle the whole way. If the rabbit just walked with the turtle, the race would have gone entirely differently, wouldn't it? It would have been a totally different story. I mean, you could have had a photo finish tie with the tortoise and the hare crossing the finish line. But because you race against time, it's going to always defeat you. How are you connected? The driven disciples, I believe, are kind of moving, working the crowd. Jesus feels the touch of a particular woman in the throng of the crowd, and he says, who touches me? Or who touched me? And the disciples are kind of just, in disbelief. Jesus, don't you see the people all around us? What kind of stupid question is that? And have you ever gotten to that point in your own life where you've snapped like that? I'm not saying whoever responded to Jesus needed to ask for forgiveness. But if you read it through, couldn't you hear a little edginess in the question? It's possible. I'm not saying it's definite, but it's possible. Jesus, at verse 30, who touched my garment? And his disciples said unto him, thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and thou sayest, who touched me? Can't you just hear a little bit of edginess in it? The same edginess that comes out of your voice when you're under pressure, when you're pushed against time, when your back's against the wall. Don't you see what? I'm busy here. Why don't you get with the program? Figure it out. Whatever is your main way of communicating your frustration, it comes out. Are you like the driven disciples? Now, maybe in this story you'd say, I am nothing like the carefree crowd. I am not there just for something I'm going to get. I'm not there to just share an experience or to enjoy the event or what's going on. Or I'm not all that. No, I'm not the carefree crowd. For crying out loud, Pastor, I'm here on Wednesday night when the plague is going through the church, okay? And so I'm dedicated, I'm devoted, and here I am. And great, that's wonderful. So are you a driven disciple where you're not focused on yourself, but you're focused on your service? You're focused on your service. Oh, yeah. Service is great. Just on break, read a book, and it was written by a pastor of a church that I probably would never go to. But some of the metrics that he gave was really interesting. He said that in 7 years, his church grew 1,000 people each year. I could barely keep up with us growing, 10, 20 a year. I can't imagine what 1,000 a year would be. And one of the statements he made was, isn't it ironic that I can build the greatest church and have nothing to show for it? And he said he came to a point where he realized, I got to get in touch with what's really important. And he had some really great observations, and I needed it. It helped me, and it really brought to my mind this passage. Am I a driven disciple? Am I focused on my service? And that's really the operative word in that sentence, my service. I'm busy and running here and running there, and I'm doing this kind of thing and that kind of thing, and I don't have time. I can't even do anything else. They say that you have a limit, and the margin that you need to have in your life is that you have space between the load you're regularly carrying and your limit. But the fact is, when you study all Americans, we are often maxing out, at least those who are working a steady job, who are bringing home regular income, who have those typical patterns in their life. We are maxing out our limit to where we have no margin. And it's only the slightest feather that can tip everything out of whack, and we're all of a sudden just a wreck because we didn't account for that simple little feather. But if we had a margin where we said, I'm not going 100%, I'm going not necessarily a specific percent that I determined, I'm going to go the percentage that God is going to determine in my life. And I'm going to make sure that I'm doing exactly what God wants me to do right here, right now, nothing more, nothing less. Whatever that is, God knows what I need to take and what I can bear at this point. Jesus said unto the people, he said, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And he tells them, I'll take my yoke upon you. Why? Because my yoke is easy. I think that one of the things that stands out to me is if I am driven in my service, I will not find it easy. I'm not saying that life is easy. I'm not saying that at all. There are a lot of complexities and hardships in life, that life is not easy. But what Jesus is offering is his yoke is easy. Why is his yoke easy? Well, we could analyze that passage and look at it from a whole lot of different vantage points. But some of the things that jump out in my mind is that, notice he's offering a yoke. If you're weary and heavy laden, and Jesus was advertising, let's take it, not Jesus, you're advertising. If you were to make an advertisement to all the weary and heavy laden people out there, what would you offer them? Would you offer them a shovel? Would you offer them a tool of labor, or would you offer them a vacation? A 3-day retreat? An enrichment conference? We look at it and we say, we're weary and heavy laden. Offer me something that gives me a break, a timeout. Give me a respite, a relief, or whatever the case may be. But does Jesus offer that? There are times in his ministry where he pulls apart so that way he's able to get that strength and communion with the Lord, so he's able, with his Father, so that he's able to proceed in the ministry of the calling of the Father. But for the most part, what does Jesus offer? He says, I'm going to give you an implement to do the work, but to do it the easy way. And what's the easy button in our spiritual life? It's that Jesus is alongside of us. And that's why I get the idea, if you are the hare and the tortoise and the hare, then walk with the tortoise and don't run ahead of him. Why? Because Jesus is offering, I'll carry my part of the yoke, which is more than my fair share. And if you'll just come alongside of me and yoke up with me, then this will go well. This is why the yoke is easy, because it's in teamwork with God. You always, with the yoke of oxen, you'd put the stronger one on whatever side, right side, left side, I don't know. I'm not a farmer. but you put the stronger, the more experienced one on that side, and then the other one is next to it, and it doesn't have as much of the brunt of the work and the force, but it's being trained, it's being strengthened, it's being brought into the pattern of what the farmer is intending for the oxen to do. And Jesus is saying, I'm willing to partner with you in this work. Why don't you work with me? But instead, we're on that yoke, and we're like trying to be like, Jesus, I'll do it. I'll hustle through. I'll hurdle through everything. And Jesus is just saying, I offer you the easy yoke. The driven disciples are going to be frustrated. They're going to snap. They're going to come to their wits' end. Why? Because they are so focused on their ministry, their service. And they have forgotten that there's a way for it to be the easy way. So what's the third option? The third option is really represented in the lowly lady and the lowly ladies, I guess you could say, in this passage. You have the woman with the issue of blood, and then you have Jairus' daughter. Both represent individuals that were completely helpless. They couldn't do anything for themselves. Clearly, the woman with the health issues couldn't do anything for herself. She'd spent everything, she had done everything she could with all the doctors to try to remedy the situation. Nothing is helping her situation. She's spent all, done all. There's nothing else. She's completely helpless. She's ostracized by society. She probably has not been able to go to temple worship for all of these 12 years because of being ceremonially unclean. She's probably had to be ostracized from some family gatherings and some different things just because of all that's going on. Because if she was in direct contact with anyone being ceremonially unclean, then they would be ceremonially unclean, and that could become just a domino effect of inconvenience to everybody. And so to be in this plight for 12 years, this has been a wreck on her life. 12 years of wrestling with this and completely helpless. Obviously, Jairus' daughter is a 12-year-old girl. As just a young person is helpless, but she can't even go and ask for help herself. Her dad has to go do it, and it's not by the invocation of the daughter. He's just going to do this. He's a self-starter, going to find the solution. He's going to do what he can. And so you have these two who are helpless. They're the ones that you would say are the most likely to miss it. They're not able to make contact with Jesus like everyone else can, and they're not necessarily in alignment with his service. They are just totally helpless, but yet Jesus is able to make contact with them, and the work of God is felt in their life in a dramatic way, in a transforming way, in a way that's beyond anything that the disciples even experience until Jesus brings those three into the room with them and says, I want you to experience this with me. I want you to see what I'm going to do. And what do you think the disciples learned the moment that they saw Jesus raise that girl from off the bed? I think the first thing that they would have learned is, wow, he's powerful. Well, that's obvious. That's a no-brainer. But the second thing that I think they would have to admit that they learned in that moment would be, there's no need to rush. Jesus doesn't have an expiration of when he can actually do something miraculous. Jesus is not on some timetable and time construct that we've developed. The book that I read talked about the development of time. Why do we even have clocks and watches and all of this kind of stuff? It's really self-inflicted torture. It really is, and the study of it was really fascinating. I mean, just reading through his chapter on it was really neat. He talked about that 200 years before Christ, one Greek poet wrote, "Confound the man who invented the sundial." And so far as I know, none of you have been offended by a sundial, but this guy was hopping mad about the invention of a sundial because it divided his day into chunks and bits, and it began the progression of a different taskmaster that we willingly have said we will serve. Time has become our own master. And instead of us mastering time, time masters us. And you can see the frustration throughout all of history until you get to the point to where we are today with all our technological advances. One of the things that just cracked me up, I want to get the notes from this Senate committee meeting, but he references a Senate committee meeting in the 60s, I believe, where they were really concerned about us and this generation. They were concerned about us because in the 60s, the technological advances were coming on so fast and so rapidly, they were concerned that we would only have enough work to occupy us for like 26 weeks out of the year. And we were going to have too much time for leisure. We weren't going to know what to do with ourselves. And so we would become emotionally unstable because we didn't have the work to occupy our time. And as far as I can tell, that's not the standard of living that most people are enjoying today. Why? Because we've opted to take on more and more and more. One of the things that stands out is that the natural form of time has been when the sun rises and when the sun sets. So during the winters, days are a lot shorter. The opportunity to get stuff done is a lot less. And the guy I was reading, he said, and it just cracked me up because I've had this thought. He said, I've read about these great heroes of the faith, Martin Luther and others who would say, I can't start my day without praying for 4 hours and then getting to the tasks that God has for me after that. And he said, I would think, how in the world do they fit 4 hours of prayer into their life? And then he said, then I realized that, well, when you go to bed when the sun sets and you get up when the sun rises, you've had 11 hours of nothing to do, And I don't know about you, but I can only sleep for so much time. I mean, there comes a point where I'm getting out of bed. I just can't stay in bed anymore. Usually for me, it's like 7 hours, maybe if I'm really tired, 8 hours, but like at 7 hours, I just can't do anymore. I'm just done. Like I've maxed out my sleeping in at 7 hours. Just can't do it. And he said, so like if it's dark outside for 11 hours and you can sleep for 7 of those hours, what else are you going to do? You're going to pray. And I look at that and say, well, isn't that just such a wonderful primitive blessing? Or you can look at it and say, are we really operating according to the way of Jesus? How is Jesus operating in this point of Mark 5? He's operating at a whole different pace. And what I would like to leave as the final challenge for 2022 is look back at this year. I have, and I'm wanting to make some big adjustments. But look back at this year and ask yourself, was I mastered by time? Or did I master time? Was I a driven disciple? Or can I be more like these lowly ladies, these lowly people who weren't focused on themselves? They weren't focused on their service. They were just focused on their Savior. That's it. Nothing else mattered to Jairus. All he wanted was Jesus. And he could take Jesus however Jesus came. But that's all he needed. And maybe if we make the adjustment to actually pattern our lives according to the way of Jesus, we'd be able to enjoy the life that Jesus has promised. When you read through John 10, you read that Jesus points out that the thief has come to kill and to destroy. When I look around at our culture today, there's a lot of killing and destroying. And it's not just by murderers, it's by our enslavement to time. We are killing ourselves. Second year straight, the average lifespan of the American has gone down. Second year straight. Women used to be, before 2019, estimated to live to be 80. It's now under 80. Men, it's like 76. It's gone down. It's going down. Why? Well, because a lot of different factors. But we are really killing ourselves. And I really want to look at this and say, I want to not be serving the thief who comes in to steal and destroy. Because at the end of John 10:10, he says, the thief has come to steal and to destroy, but I have come to give life and to give life more abundant. I want the abundant life. So when Jesus stands up in John 14, 4 chapters later, in verse 6, and he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. There's a formula going on there because John's talked about that life before. And if Jesus is the source of that life, then maybe the way and the truth are parts of that formula that allow me to really understand what the life is all about. And what I've really been wrestling with in my own mind is I have no issue with the truth of Jesus. Do you? I mean, do you struggle with the truth of Jesus? There are probably times where it chafes a little bit, but there are times where you look at it and you say, that's what the Word of God says. That's what it's going to be. That's how I believe. God said it, that settles it. And that's how we're going to operate. For most of us in our church, we probably aren't struggling with the truth of Jesus. But what about the first part of that formula? Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. What about the way of Jesus? Do we struggle with the way of Jesus? Do we struggle with doing things the way Jesus would do them? Do we struggle with finding that balance and serenity in that place where I'm not rushing ahead of God, I'm not falling behind him, I'm right in step with him? That's my prayer for Prayer Intensive, that I would be able to lock in on that. And it's not like a once and done, I've locked in, I never have to worry about it. It's a constant check. It's a constant check. And to have that constant touch with God allows me to keep in stride with him. So tonight, just sharing some of the things that have been my observation and my own personal assessment. Many of you know I pick a theme word for the year. Thought I knew what my theme word was going to be, but then the Lord's given me a whole different direction in the last week. So I don't know. I'm still wrestling with what my theme word will be. But I suspect it'll have something to do with pace. And we'll see. We'll see what it comes down to. I'm not telling you that you need to choose this kind of word for your life for this year. But what I would encourage you to do is really consider. If your life is the tortoise and the hare, and you're the hare, are you wearing yourself out and having nothing to show for it in the end? Because in the end, time's going to cross that finish line with or without you. You're not racing against me, and I'm not racing against you. Really, you're racing against time. You're racing against the fellowship and communion with God. And don't cheat yourself out of the work of God. Don't miss it by rushing ahead or lagging behind. Be right in step with him.